The car's engine sputtered to silence, leaving only the crunch of gravel beneath Katya's boots as she stepped into the void of the estate. The house loomed, a skeletal silhouette against the bruised twilight sky. Its once grand facade now a mosaic of peeling cream paint and frostbitten ivy. She tugged her coat tighter, the cold already seeping through layers, sharp as a blade. This is it, she thought, the words brittle in her mind. Home. The front door groaned open, exhaling a breath of dust and decay. Inside, the air hung thick with the scent of damp wood and forgotten time, each inhale a reminder that this place had not been touched for decades. Sunlight, pale and anemic, filtered through frosted windows, casting fractured patterns on the floorboards. The hallway stretched ahead, symmetrical and hollow, its walls lined with empty frames, gashes where portraits once hung. Why would they take the pictures? Her fingers brushed the peeling wallpaper, its floral pattern long since muted to ghostly blue. A single crystal chandelier, half frosted with grime, dangled overhead like a frozen tear. Patches of dust swirled in the light, suspended mid-air, as if the house itself had paused to watch her. She knelt, tracing a finger through the powder on a side table. This is what remains. The thought felt too heavy for the quiet room. Her pulse quickened, not from fear, she told herself, but from the weight of possibility. The house was a question, and she had come to answer it. The silence was wrong. Not peaceful, but waiting. She could feel it in the hollows of her ribs, the way the shadows clung to the corners, too deep for the daylight. A draft slithered down her neck, though the windows were sealed shut. Rational, she reminded herself. Drafts, old houses, simple physics. But her breath hitched when she noticed the floorboards. Two parallel grooves, worn smooth by footsteps that no longer existed. As if someone had paced this hall for years, waiting for her. She stepped into the parlor. A grand piano, its keys yellowed and cracked, stood sentinel in the center of the room. On the mantel, a clock, its hands frozen at 3:07. Time stopped here. The thought slithered in, unbidden. She turned, heart hammering against her ribs, but the doorway behind her was empty. Just dust. Just air. A draft snuffed the candle she hadn't lit. Katya froze. The air felt heavier now, charged with the static of something unsaid. She stared at the piano, its lid propped open like a mouth mid-scream. The wood grain swirled in patterns too precise, too deliberate. A labyrinth of knots that seemed to shift when she blinked. This isn't just a house. It's a vessel. The realization settled like ice in her veins. The past wasn't buried here. It was alive, coiled in the silence, watching her through the dust. She backed toward the door, but the shadows had deepened, swallowing the edges of the room. The cold seeped deeper, into her bones, into the spaces between her thoughts. "I came to understand," she whispered, the words dissolving before they left her lips. But what if the truth is a mirror? Outside, the wind howled through the pines, but inside, the house held its breath, waiting. The dust settled, the silence remained, and somewhere in the dark, the clock began to tick. The western wing exhaled a breath of frost. Katya's fingers trailed the gilded edges of a moth-eaten velvet armchair, its fabric split like ice over a frozen pond. Sunlight, thin and blue as a glacier's core, seeped through cracked panes, illuminating dust motes not as specks, but as suspended shards, crystalline, weightless. The air hummed with a silence that felt occupied. She pushed open a wardrobe. Inside, a mothball-scented void. A single coat hung, its woolen weave frayed into geometric lattices. The buttons, pearl but clouded, caught the light like frozen teardrops. Katya lifted the collar. A seam had split, revealing a slip of paper. Irina V, in faded ink. Her grandmother's initials, but the V bled into the fabric, as if the pen had trembled. The floorboards groaned underfoot, each step a counterpoint to the house's pulse. A mirror hung crookedly in the hallway, its mercury surface pitted. Katya paused. For a breath, her reflection didn't move. She turned. No one. Only the corridor, stretching back in symmetrical arches. Identical doors on either side like a kaleidoscope's echo. Then, the commode. Tucked beneath a stairwell, its oak surface blackened with age, but polished to a glassy sheen. I.V. branded into the lid. The V cracked down the middle. Katya tugged the drawer. Stuck. She jiggled the handle. Click! But the wood resisted, as if frozen shut. A draft whispered through the keyhole, carrying a scent like wet stone and lavender. Her pulse thudded in her throat. The house wasn't empty. It was waiting. She pressed her palm to the commode. Cold seeped into her skin, sharp as a blade. A flicker in the periphery, a shadow, but not hers. She spun. Nothing, only the mirror, reflecting her own wide eyes, multiplied in the hall's endless repetition. What if the truth isn't a key, she thought, but a lock? The commode's crack pulsed. For a second, she saw not wood, but a glacial crevasse, dark and bottomless. Her breath fogged the air. The draft returned, this time with a voice. Her grandmother's? A murmur beneath the floorboards. You shouldn't have come back. Katya stepped back. The drawer gave a shudder. Not open. Closing. Outside, the forest held its breath. The house, she realized, was not a vessel for memory. It was the memory itself, alive, hungry. And it had been watching her long before she stepped through the door. Her fingers brushed the commode's lid again. The crack widened. Something inside shifted. Not a sound. A presence, pressing against the wood. She ran her thumb over the V. The splinter cut her. A bead of blood welled, vivid against the blackened grain. What if the past isn't something you uncover, the house seemed to whisper, but something that uncovers you? The commode stilled. The blood dried on her skin, black as ink. She turned away. But the reflection in the mirror lingered, staring at the commode, smiling. The western wing exhaled decay. Katya's breath fogged the air as she pushed the door, a splintered oak slab, its hinges screaming like frozen tendons. Inside, the room was a tomb of symmetry. 2 shuttered windows, a moth-eaten divan, and the mirror. It dominated the wall, its frame carved with ice-veined silver lilies, petals curling into Soviet-era hammers she'd missed in the dim light. No dust. Only frost etching the glass like shattered crystal. She approached, fingers hovering over the surface. Her reflection should have been there. Pale cheeks, chapped lips, the frayed collar of her sweater. But the glass held only the empty room behind her. A trick. A flaw. She pressed her palm flat. The cold bit through skin, seeping into bone. Refraction, she told herself. A crack in the silvering, a trick of the light. But the room behind her was clear. The divan's threadbare velvet, the window's geometric frost, her own trembling hand. Yet where her face should be, a void. Her pulse thudded in her throat. She leaned closer. The glass rippled, not like water, but like ice under pressure. For a breath, a face flickered, her grandmother's, lips parted as if mid-whisper. Then gone. Impossible. The air thickened, blue-tinged, as if the room had inhaled and refused to exhale. She stepped back, but the floorboards held her. The mirror's void pulsed, a black pupil dilating. A memory surged, her mother's hands clutching a photograph, trembling. Some doors stay shut for a reason, Katya. Now the void moved. Not a reflection, an absence that pulled. She felt it in her ribs, a suction, as if the mirror were peeling her skin from the inside. Her breath came in ragged shards. This isn't real. It can't be. But the frost on the glass spread, crystalline tendrils branching like veins. A whisper, not sound, but vibration. Irina. The name unspooled in her skull. She turned. No one. Only the room, frozen in a moment that wasn't hers. The divan's fabric, the shutter's slats, the mirror's frame, all mirrored her stance, but the glass showed nothing. What if I never existed here? The thought slithered, insidious. What if I'm already the ghost? She reached again, desperate to shatter the illusion. Her fingers met ice, not the glass, her own skin, translucent, cracking. A scream lodged in her throat. The room blurred. The mirror's void deepened, swallowing the edges of the room, the walls, the light. For a heartbeat, she saw two figures. Irina, her hands pressed against the glass from the other side, and a shadowed shape behind her, grasping her wrist. Then the void collapsed inward. Silence. Katya stood, whole, breathing. The mirror now reflected her, pale, shaken, ordinary. But the frost remained, tracing a single word in the corner. Sleduj. Follow. Her hand shook as she touched the glass. It was warm. Whose reflection is this? The question hovered, unspoken. The room held its breath. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, a sound like a mother calling a child home. But home had never been this place. Home had been a lie. She stepped back. The mirror's surface rippled again. This time, it was her face, but older, eyes hollow, mouth moving in silent warning. It's too late. The words dissolved like ice in sunlight. The room's symmetry fractured. One shutter creaked open, spilling weak afternoon light. The mirror showed only the empty room. But Katya knew. The void had already taken root. She turned to leave. The door was gone. Only the mirror remained, waiting. The telephone crackled like breaking ice. Katya's fingers froze around the receiver, its bakelite surface slick with sweat. Static hissed between her fragmented words. It's not in my head. The cold, the whispers, the way the walls shift. Dr. Sokolov arrived at dusk, his lada crunching over gravel that glittered with frost. He wore a wool coat frayed at the cuffs, a Soviet-era satchel slung over his shoulder. His eyes, sharp as fractured glass, scanned the mansion's facade, peeling paint, iron gates twisted like frozen breath. "You called about a mirror?" he asked, voice flat. Most people report ghosts, or rodents. The western wing smelled of damp velvet and decaying lilies. Katya led him past a shattered chandelier, its crystals scattered like frozen tears. Sokolov paused at a window. Outside, the forest loomed, trees skeletal against a bruised sky. "Your mother never mentioned this." "She doesn't speak of it." Katya's throat tightened. "But the air here, it cracks, like ice underfoot." He scoffed, pulling a thermometer from his satchel. Pressed against the wall, it dropped to -10 degrees Celsius. "Impossible. It's August." His breath fogged the dial. He snapped a photo of the window pane, where frost had formed a symmetrical lattice, geometric, deliberate. "Your house is bleeding cold." Katya's pulse quickened. Hope, a fragile thing, crystallizing in her chest. Sokolov knelt, brushing dust from a moth-eaten rug. Its pattern, interlocking spirals, mirrored the frost outside. "You say the whispers come from here?" He tapped the floorboards, a hollow echo. "Structural decay, common in old manors." But his hands trembled as he retrieved a vial of liquid nitrogen from his bag. "Let's test the air." The vapor hissed as he released it. Instead of dissipating, it coalesced into a swirling vortex hovering above the rug. Sokolov's skepticism fractured. "This isn't natural." His gaze flicked to the corner where the mirror should have been. He didn't look directly. No one ever did. Katya stepped closer. "It's alive." He didn't deny it. Instead, he pulled a cracked photograph from his satchel. A girl in a 1980s hospital gown, her face blurred by time. "My sister vanished near a house like this. Same symptoms." His voice was ice-shattering. "They said she froze to death. In July." The thermometer shattered on the floor. Sokolov didn't flinch. "You want answers." A statement, not a question. "But answers don't fix broken things." He gestured at the frozen vapor, now pulsing like a heartbeat. They only make the cracks visible. Katya reached for the vial. Her reflection warped in the liquid nitrogen's surface. A flicker of someone else's face, then gone. Sokolov snapped the vial shut. Stay away from the western wing. But his eyes lingered on the frost patterns, now spreading across the ceiling. Symmetrical. Inevitable. The Lada's engine coughed to life. As he drove away, Katya stood in the doorway, watching the headlights carve tunnels through the snow. The forest held its breath. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. It chose you, too. The frost on the window bloomed into a perfect, unbroken circle. Dr. Sokolov adjusted his glasses, peering at the mirror with the detached curiosity of a man dissecting a specimen. Fascinating antique, he said, his voice echoing slightly in the dim room. Soviet era likely. The frost? Probably condensation from poor insulation. Hysteria can amplify such illusions, Katya. Your mind is weaving patterns from grief and isolation. He smiled thinly, as if offering a lifeline, but his eyes held that academic skepticism she'd come to dread, measuring her like a case study, not a person unraveling. She nodded, forcing a smile, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweater. The cold from the mirror still lingered on her skin, a secret pulse she couldn't share. If I tell him about the whispers, the shapes behind the glass, he'll prescribe more pills, dismiss it as delusion. The words stuck in her throat. Trust had eroded with every session. He saw symptoms, not truths. You're right, doctor. It's nothing. He packed his notebook, glancing at the door. Rest. I'll check in tomorrow. And Katya, don't let the house play tricks on you. His footsteps faded down the hall, the front door clicking shut behind him. The car engine hummed to life outside, gravel crunching as it pulled away. Alone now, the silence pressed in, heavier than before. She turned back to the mirror, drawn despite herself, the frost blooming anew like an invitation. The mirror breathed. Not a fog, but a slow exhalation of frost, crystallizing the air between Katya and her own reflection. The room behind her, dust-laden, with its Soviet-era chandelier hanging like a frozen candelabra, faded. In its place, a corridor of blue-tinged glass. Her breath hitched. Not her corridor. Not her house. A woman's hand pressed against the other side of the glass. Not glass, ice. Thick, veined with cracks like a frozen river. The hand moved. A child's silhouette flitted behind it, small and blurred. Then a fist. A scream, muffled as if underwater. The sound didn't come from the mirror. It came from inside Katya's ribs. Look closer. The voice wasn't a voice. It was the sound of ice splitting. Her fingers brushed the mirror's surface. Cold seeped into her skin. Not the dull chill of the house, but something sharp, metallic. The reflection shifted. A room with peeling Stalinist wallpaper. A single chair overturned. The child, a girl, 7, 8, curled in the corner, arms over her head. A man's shadow loomed, angular as a splintered frame. Katya's throat tightened. Irina? The name wasn't a thought. It was a shard. She should turn away. The doctor's words echoed. Hysteria, stress. The mind constructs narratives. But the ice in the mirror was too precise. The way the girl's braid, exactly like Katya's at that age, swayed as she flinched. The shadow's hand, raised, not a fist, but a blade. A flash of silver, a gasp. Look deeper. The mirror didn't reflect, it unzipped. The scene peeled back like torn velvet, revealing another room behind it. A kitchen with a chipped porcelain sink. A woman in a faded Saratovka dress. Her back to the mirror, her hands still. Too still. Katya's pulse hammered. Elena? Her mother, decades younger, standing over a basin of blood-red water. The girl's braid, the blade, the blood. No. A lie. A trick of the mind. But the ice was real. The cold in her veins was real. She stepped closer. The mirror's surface rippled. Not like water, but like crystal. 1,000 tiny fractures aligning into a single, perfect pattern. The woman at the sink turned. Not her mother. Not Irina. A face she didn't recognize. Yet it wore her eyes. Her mouth. Her. "You always look," the voice whispered. "You always see." The room spun. The chandelier above her own head became a frozen constellation. The dust motes froze midair. Time wasn't broken. It was sliced. Layered like ice. One scene, then another, then another. The blade, the blood, the girl's face. Her face. Irina's face. All the same. She tried to step back. Her feet wouldn't move. The mirror held her, not with suction, but with recognition. As if it had been waiting. As if she had been waiting. "You can't fix it," the voice said. "You only become it." The last shard of resistance crumbled. Her hand stayed on the glass. The cold didn't burn. It integrated. The girl's flinch. The mother's stillness. The blade's arc. They weren't past. They were now. They were her. The mirror didn't lie. It remembered. And she was no longer watching. She was the scream. But even as it tore through her, she sealed it away. Dr. Sokolov would never know. Not this. Not yet. The isolation deepened, a chasm she chose herself. The mirror breathed. Katya pressed her palms against the glass, her reflection fracturing into 1,000 icy shards. Not again, she thought. But her fingers traced the frost-rimmed frame anyway. Days had blurred since the first vision. Each morning she'd return, drawn like a moth to the flame. The cold seeped into her bones, the same chill that clung to the western wing, where time curdled like forgotten milk. Outside, skeletal pines loomed. Inside, the house whispered. Dust motes danced in the weak light, echoing her grandmother's sigh. "Katyusha," it breathed. Not from the mirror, but from the hollow between her ribs. She jerked back, but the pull lingered, resinous and insistent. Yesterday, the mirror had replayed Irina's hands, blue-veined, smoothing lace. Today, the scent of lavender and blood thickened the air. Katya's breath hitched. The glass rippled, her face dissolved into a stranger's. A woman in a Soviet coat, eyes wide with terror. It vanished, but the aroma clung. "Stop!" She forced her boots across creaking floorboards. The house groaned in rhythm with her pulse. "You don't have to know." But the mirror tugged harder now, a daily ritual she couldn't break. She turned back. Her reflection's eyes darkened. Irina's eyes. The glass fogged, then cleared. The old dining room, empty save for a single chair. On it, her childhood doll, porcelain face cracked. "My doll." Buried with her father. Her stomach twisted deeper than before, the visions burrowing into her core. "You're not ready," the voice sharpened. "I'm not you," Katya hissed, raw and borrowed. She slammed her fist against the frame. Fractures spiderwebbed the glass, but the reflection held whole. The wind howled outside. Inside, the air plunged colder. Her breath fogged the mirror, yet it stayed pristine, like ice over abyss. What happens to those who look too long? Dr. Sokolov's notes echoed. The mirror doesn't show the past, it shows the wound. She touched the glass. Her reflection didn't mimic. It tilted its head, lips forming silent words. Katya leaned in. The doll's crack widened. "You're already here," it whispered. Her hands trembled. "This isn't real." But the cold, the scents, the hammering heart sank to the house's creaks. They were. She tried to pull away, but her feet rooted. The surface softened like melting ice, revealing a corridor of mirrors. A child in Soviet uniform. A woman with Irina's gaze. Shadows multiplying. Who am I? The fracture sliced her. Downstairs, the front door creaked open. Dr. Sokolov's voice called up the stairs, muffled but urgent. "Katya, you haven't answered my calls. We need to talk about this." Footsteps ascended the corridor, pausing outside her door. A knock rattled the wood. "Open up. You're not alone in this." She froze, eyes locked on the glass. The reflection smiled, alien and inviting. "Choose." Her hand hovered toward the knob, but the mirror's pull won. She turned away from the door, ignoring the growing knocks, the pleas filtering through. He can't understand. The footsteps retreated, fading like a distant echo. Her choice, sealing the isolation. The room tilted. Walls bled into forest, forest into mirror. Breath shallow. "I can't stop." Her mother's voice cut through. "Don't look." Too late. The mirror had chosen. Katya pressed her forehead to the glass. Cold invaded her marrow, threading through memories. The reflection's smile widened. "You're home now." Outside, the forest hushed. Inside, the house exhaled. The mirror held her, fully, obsessively. Dr. Sokolov's car engine rumbled away in the distance, unheard. The study smelled of damp paper and forgotten time. Dr. Sokolov's fingers trembled as he pried open the ledger, its pages brittle as frozen breath. Blue ink bled through the centuries. Irina Volkova, 1898 to 1923. Disappeared during winter solstice. No body, no note. Below it, a second entry. Elena Volkova, 1925 to 1947. Vanished same date, same silence. A third name, a fourth. All Volkovas, all December 21st. The pattern carved itself into his vision, cold and precise as a crack in ice. Katya stood in the doorway, her shadow stretching like a snapped thread. She hadn't spoken since he'd called her name. Now she watched him flip pages, her knuckles white against the doorframe. The room was all symmetry. Twin sash windows, a pair of moth-eaten armchairs, the ledger's spine split down the middle. Sokolov's breath fogged the air. She's listening, he thought. She has to be listening. Look at this, he said, voice low, urgent. He tapped the page. Your great-grandmother, the same day, the same... Katya stepped forward. A single step. Her boots scuffed the floorboards, sending up dust that glinted like shattered glass. For a moment, she leaned over the ledger, her reflection warped in the varnish of the desk. Irina, Elena, Katya. The names blurred. Her pulse throbbed in her throat. If I know the pattern, I can break it. Sokolov pointed to a margin note in faded ink. The mirror chooses. The mirror remembers. Your family didn't disappear, he said. They were taken. By the house. By the... She snatched the ledger. Paper tore. A jagged wound between the words solstice and silence. Her breath came fast, shallow. The room tilted. No, the air tilted, as if the walls were made of liquid mercury. She saw the dates again. 1898, 1923, 1947, 1972. Elena, 1972. Her mother's year of birth. The ink was fresh, the paper unaged. Impossible. Who wrote this? Her voice was a thread of ice. Sokolov hesitated. The silence between them was a third presence, thick as frost. I found it behind the mirror, he admitted. The one in the west wing. Katya dropped the ledger. It hit the floor with a sound like shattering. She backed away, her reflection fracturing in the window panes. A dozen Katyas, all wrong. One had Irina's eyes. Another, Elena's hands. The third, no. The third was just a hollow where her face should be. Sokolov lunged for her. The ritual repeats. If you know the date... The date doesn't matter, she whispered. Her voice was glass. It's already in me. Outside, the forest exhaled. Snow fell in slow, deliberate flakes, each one a perfect crystal. Inside, the ledger lay open, the torn page fluttering like a dying wing. December 21st. Katya turned. The door was a rectangle of blue light. She walked through it. Sokolov called after her. The words didn't reach. The house held its breath. The mirror waited. The western wing breathed through cracks in the plaster, its silence thick as frozen milk. Katya traced the gilded frame of the mirror with a finger, cold, sharp, alive. Dust motes hung in the blue-tinged air, suspended like ice crystals in a forgotten hour. She'd stopped counting the days since the last time she'd spoken to Dr. Sokolov. His knock now, precise as a metronome, shattered the fragile calm. He entered with a leather satchel, his eyes hollowed by sleeplessness. In his hand, a photograph. Silvered edges, the kind that curled with time. He didn't speak, just pressed it into her palm. Her breath hitched. The face on the photo, pale, wide-eyed, was the same one that had surfaced in the mirror last night. The same lips that had parted, as if to whisper. The same eyes that had followed her through the fractured glass. "This is Anya." Sokolov's voice was a thread of sound. "My sister. She vanished 20 years ago, in this house." Katya's fingers trembled. The girl's hair, the tilt of her chin, it was Irina's face, but not Irina's. A mirror within a mirror. The photograph seemed to pulse, its surface rippling like a frozen pond. She saw the ghost of a bruise along the girl's jaw, a detail she'd missed in the mirror's distorted reflection. Real, not a vision. Real. "You don't understand," Sokolov said, gripping her wrist. His touch was iron. "The mirror doesn't show the past. It shows what's missing. It feeds on absence." She wrenched free. The room tilted. The air smelled of wet stone and something metallic. Blood? Or just the cold seeping through her bones? She turned back to the mirror. The surface shuddered. For a second, she saw Anya's face again, clearer now. Then a flicker. Irina's smile, broken by the same crack that ran through the glass. "Stop," Sokolov pleaded. "You're inviting it in." But the mirror was singing. A low hum, vibrating through the floorboards. She leaned closer. The reflection blurred, then sharpened. Her own face, but wrong. The eyes too dark. The mouth moving in silent words. "You're next." She touched the glass. It felt like skin. Sokolov grabbed her shoulder, his voice urgent. Irina didn't disappear. She stepped through, and the mirror kept her. Katya's breath fogged the surface. The fog didn't dissipate. It clung, a second layer of glass. She saw Anya again. No, not Anya. Herself, but with Irina's eyes. The photograph in her hand felt like a live wire. "Who am I reflecting now?" Sokolov's words dissolved into static. The mirror's pull was a current, a tide dragging her toward the edge of something vast and dark. She pressed her forehead to the cold glass. The world behind her, the creaking floor, the doctor's panicked breathing, faded. Only the reflection remained. It's not a window, she realized. It's a door. The photograph slipped from her fingers. The face on the floor stared up at her, unblinking. Katya closed her eyes. When she opened them, the mirror showed only empty room. But the silence was different now. It had teeth. The phone rang like a shard of ice snapping in the silence. Katya's fingers froze above the cold porcelain receiver. The house breathed around her, a slow, damp inhalation through the cracks in the floorboards, the creak of a shutter in the west wing. Outside, the birch trees clawed at the window panes, their shadows stretching like skeletal fingers across the peeling wallpaper. Blue. Everything is blue. The gas lamp hissed, casting a pallid glow over the dust motes suspended in the air, frozen mid-fall. She picked up. "Mama?" Elena's voice came through like a transmission from another world, crackling, thin, as if the wire itself were fraying. Don't look into the mirror. A pause, not hesitation. Resignation. Promise me. Katya's throat tightened. The words hung in the air, brittle as the ice on the pond behind the house. Why? What did you see? Silence. Not the absence of sound, the kind that presses, the kind that swallows. Mama? A breath, shallow. Then, click. The dial tone droned, mechanical and indifferent, as Katya stared at the receiver. Her reflection in the darkened window behind her, pale, hollow-eyed, blurred as the room tilted. Why now? The question coiled in her chest, cold and serpentine. The house seemed to lean in, walls closing like the jaws of a crypt. She turned. The mirror waited in the far corner of the parlor, its silvered surface shrouded in a moth-eaten cloth. A relic. A wound. Don't look. But the cloth was already shifting, as if the glass beneath it breathed. Her pulse hammered against her ribs. She knows. She's always known. The thought was a shard of glass in her mind. For years, Elena had spoken of Irina only in whispers, as if the name itself might crack the air. Now the silence was a language. I am afraid. I am broken. I am next. Katya stepped closer. The floorboards groaned, a sound like ice underfoot. Her fingers hovered over the cloth. What if the truth is a knife? What if I bleed out the moment I see it? The mirror's edge glinted, silver, sharp, alive. A reflection of nothing. Or everything. She snatched her hand back. The room exhaled. Outside, the wind carried a sound like laughter. Or weeping. Why did you let it take her? The unspoken question hung between them, a chasm filled with frost. Elena's silence wasn't protection, it was a verdict. You are already in the glass. Katya sank into the armchair, its velvet upholstery cold as a tomb. The lamp sputtered, shadows fractured into jagged shards, mirroring the splinters in her thoughts. If I stop looking, will it stop looking for me? The fear was no longer a whisper. It was a voice inside her skull, speaking in Irina's cadence. The dial tone still echoed in her ears. A loop, a cycle. Some doors can't be unopened. She closed her eyes. The darkness behind her lids was not empty. It was a room. A woman in a blue dress. A hand reaching through glass. Don't look. But the mirror had already looked back. The western wing exhaled frost. Katya's breath coiled in the blue-tinged air, a ghostly thread unraveling into the silence. The mirror absorbed the room, not reflecting it, but swallowing it, like ink in water. Outside the window, ice blossomed in fractal lattices, faces pressed against the glass from the other side. A child's cheek, a woman's hollowed eye. Irina? The thought came unbidden, then dissolved like vapor on cold metal. Her fingers hovered near the mirror's edge but didn't touch. The cold wasn't in the air, it lived in her bones now, a slow, crystalline seep. If I see the truth, I can fix it. The lie pulsed beneath her ribs, warm against the freeze. But the mirror had taken her mother's voice, taken Irina's last breath. What would it take from her? The house groaned. A splintered floorboard echoed like a snapped spine. In the glass, the ice-veined faces shifted. Smiling? Weeping? Her pulse hammered in time with the silence, a metronome of dread. Time bled together. Yesterday's dust, tomorrow's void, all trapped in this room where breath turned to snow. She was a specter in the gap between seconds, a crack in the glass. Control. Name the fear. Name it. But words were ice shards, melting on her tongue. The mirror breathed. She breathed. The same rhythm, the same cold. The frost patterns surged, multiplying into a mosaic of weeping eyes, a handprint blooming inside the window pane. Her reflection flickered. Irina's eyes, her mother's lips. And for a heartbeat, the glass was no boundary at all. Just a membrane, thin as a frozen tear. Invitation or warning? The question crystallized in her mind, sharp as the icicles clawing the eaves. She stopped resisting the pull. Let the cold fill her lungs. Let the reflection rewrite her bones. The last thought before the world fractured. The mirror was never a window. It was a door, and she had already stepped through. Lace, ice, glass. Breathe. Not me, not now, never. The mirror didn't reflect the room. It reflected her, but not as she stood now, shivering in the frayed wool of her grandmother's shawl. Behind her, the figure in the glass tilted its head, lips parting in a smile Katya hadn't made. A cold so sharp it felt like crushed glass pricked her lungs. Not possible. She spun, heart hammering against ribs like a trapped bird. Empty air. Dust motes hung frozen in the slanted light, as if the house itself held its breath. Turning back, she froze. The figure now traced a finger along the mirror's edge, slow, deliberate. Its eyes, her eyes, locked onto hers, glinting with a knowing that wasn't hers. The room's chill deepened, seeping into her bones like liquid crystal. She reached out, fingertips brushing the glass. It didn't feel solid. It felt alive. A thin membrane of ice, vibrating with a hum she'd heard in the house's walls since she arrived. "Why are you smiling?" she wanted to scream, but her throat closed. The double's lips curved wider, revealing teeth too white, too perfect. A flicker, its hand lifted, not mirroring her, but waving. "Goodbye." Panic clawed up her spine. She stumbled back, knocking over a porcelain vase inherited from a great-aunt she'd never met. Shards scattered like frozen stars. The sound didn't echo. It shattered the silence, splintering the air into jagged fragments. She gasped, but the breath that came out wasn't hers. It was a sigh, soft, familiar, the same one her mother made when hanging laundry in the courtyard. "Elena." The mirror's surface rippled. The double stepped forward, out of the frame. No glass broke, no barrier held. It moved with a dancer's grace, hair catching the weak light like spun silver. Katya's vision blurred. Her reflection's face began to shift, fading into a younger woman's features, then an older one, then a child's. "Irina? Mother?" Her own face dissolved into the faces of women she'd never seen, but somehow knew. She clutched her head, nails biting into her temples. The cold was inside her now, crystallizing her thoughts. "If I know the truth, I can fix it." The lie burned, but the fire was icy. She tried to scream, but the sound that tore from her throat was a whisper. "Who are you?" The double paused, inches from her. Its breath fogged the air, though Katya felt no warmth. It pressed a palm against her cheek. The touch was both foreign and intimate, a lover's caress, a stranger's claim. Her skin tingled, then burned with frost. She tried to pull away, but her limbs were heavy, leaden. The room's symmetry blurred. The mirror no longer stood against the wall. It was everywhere. The chipped wallpaper, the cracked floorboards, the very air, they all reflected her, fragmented, multiplying. Dozens of Katyas stared back, each with a different expression. Grief, rage, emptiness. "You're already here," the double mouthed, though no sound came. "The house chose you. It always has." Her vision fractured further. Words lost meaning. Katya Volkova, a name that once anchored her, now felt like a shard of ice held too long. The cold wasn't in her, it was her. Crystalline, transparent, ready to shatter. The last thing she saw was the double stepping back into the mirror, its hand still raised in farewell. or invitation. She stood alone, or not alone. Who stood at all? The mirror no longer reflected the room. It reflected her, but not as she was. The wallpaper, once faded rose, now hung in tatters like the skin of a molting serpent. Dust lay thick as snow on the vanity, the chair, the floorboards, though she had swept it hours ago. A cold blue light seeped from the glass, turning the familiar into a fossil of itself. This is Irina's room. The thought arrived without shock, only a slow, crystalline certainty. The armchair by the window was the one she'd seen in photographs of her grandmother. Upholstered in moth-eaten velvet, legs splintered like old bones. A porcelain doll, its face cracked into a rictus smile, sat where Katya's notebook should have been. Dobro pожаловать домой, the voice sighed from the glass. Not through it, from within it, as if the air itself had learned to speak. Irina's voice, but layered with something else. A chorus of whispers, the static of 1,000 winters. Katya's fingers hovered just short of the glass. No, she wouldn't touch it. She couldn't. But the mirror didn't need her hands. It had already pressed itself into her ribs, her throat, the spaces between her thoughts. The cold wasn't outside anymore. It was the shape of her mind. She turned to look at her own room, the real one. The bed was unmade, the window unbroken, but the dust motes in the air? They moved backward, drifting upward toward the ceiling, then dissolving into the glass. How long has it been? The question felt wrong. Time here wasn't a line, it was a prism, shattering light into endless overlapping shards. Her grandmother's chair, her mother's silence, Dr. Sokolov's hollow eyes when he'd said, "Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed." A sound, not a creak, not a whisper, the crack of ice forming in the marrow of her bones. She was no longer the one staring at the mirror. She was the one staring out. The room and the reflection flickered. For a heartbeat, she saw herself as she had been, yesterday, last week, before the cold settled in her veins. Then the image shifted. The girl in the mirror wore Irina's shawl. Her eyes were hollow as a church after a funeral. This is how it ends. Not with a scream, not with a fight, with the quiet horror of belonging. The dust wasn't decay, it was the house breathing, the house remembering, the house choosing. Her breath fogged the air. Or was it the mirror fogging her? The doll's head tilted, a sound like glass cracking underfoot. You can't outrun what's already inside you. The thought didn't feel like hers. The room spun, not the room, the world. The walls bled into the glass bled into her. She tried to step back, but her feet were anchored in something thicker than shadow. If I am the reflection, who is the original? The question dissolved before it could form. The blue light deepened, the dust swirled. The mirror no longer showed a room, it showed a door, and the door was open. She felt the pull, not a force, but a recognition, like returning to a wound that had always been there. The cold wasn't killing her, it was completing her. Welcome home. The words weren't in Russian anymore. They were in the language of the house, the language of the ice. Katya closed her eyes. When she opened them, the mirror showed only her own face. But the face in the glass was smiling. It was a smile she had never worn. This is not me. This is not me. This is not... The thought fractured. The glass hummed. The dust settled. She was home. The hammer's iron head caught the moonlight, a shard of glacier in her palm. Katya's knuckles whitened against the cold wood, the weight both alien and familiar, like a limb she'd forgotten she possessed. The room breathed with her, the dust motes suspended in the blue-tinged air, crystalline. Outside, the forest gnawed at the walls. Inside, the mirror pulsed. Not a reflection, but a presence. A void that had bled into her veins, freezing her blood with the certainty of a coming winter. Dr. Sokolov stood in the doorway, his silhouette fractured by the moon's glare through the broken window. "You don't understand what you're breaking," he said, voice fraying. "It's not glass. It's a threshold." She raised the hammer. The motion echoed in the stillness, a sound like cracking ice. 20 years ago, my sister held that same tool. He stepped closer, hands open, pleading. She thought it would free her. It only made the door wider. Katya's breath fogged the air. The cold wasn't outside anymore. It was in her lungs, in the marrow of her bones. She saw Irina's hands, her hands, trembling over the same mirror, decades ago. The same room, the same choice. "Let me go," she whispered, but the words were ice on her tongue. Sokolov's eyes flickered to the mirror. "Destroying it won't stop the cycle. It is the cycle." The hammer trembled, not from fear, from recognition. The mirror wasn't a prison. It was a ledger. Every fracture she'd caused, every truth she'd unearthed, had already been written there. In Irina's silence, in her mother's hollow eyes, in the way the house exhaled when she entered, as if it had been waiting. She turned to the glass. The room beyond was older, the walls stained with time, the floorboards split like frozen rivers. A figure stood there, not her, but the idea of her. A ghost of a woman who'd also grasped a hammer, who'd also believed she could shatter the past. "It's not a choice," the silence whispered. "It's a surrender." The hammer slipped from her fingers, clattering against the stone. The sound was final, a death knell, or a lullaby. Sokolov didn't move. His face was a mask of grief and something worse. Relief. As if he'd known, all along, that she would never leave. That the house would keep her, as it had kept Irina. As it would keep the next. Katya stepped forward, not toward the mirror, but into it. The boundary between them dissolved like frost under a breath. The cold deepened, but it no longer burned. It was part of her now. The room shifted, walls narrowing, then expanding, time folding in on itself. She saw Irina's hands, her mother's, her own, all reaching, all failing. "This is not a story with an ending," the house sighed. "It is a reflection without a source." The hammer lay forgotten on the floor, a useless relic. The only truth left was the cold. The only peace was in letting it in. She stopped fighting. The world turned to ice. And then, silence. The hammer struck the glass. Not a shatter, no. The sound was a liquid sigh, like ice cracking under a river's breath. Katya's arm vanished past the wrist, swallowed by the mirror's surface. Cold seeped into her bones, 1,000 needle pricks of frost threading through her veins. She tried to pull back, but the glass held her, a glacial mouth clamping down. This is how it ends, she thought, not with fire, but with blue. The room blurred, walls bled into the mirror's depths, the peeling wallpaper of the West Wing folding into itself like a dying star. She saw her own face, but no, not hers. A woman with her mother's eyes, her grandmother's sharp cheekbones, staring back through a lattice of frost. Irina? The reflection raised a hand. Katya's hand moved in tandem, but the gesture felt borrowed, a puppet's twitch. The hammer, still clutched in her other fist, was heavy with the weight of generations. Its iron head, scarred from decades of use, glinted like a shard of frozen time. "Stop resisting." The words weren't spoken. They grew in her chest, root-like, from the cold. She had come here to break the mirror, to shatter the cycle. But the glass was never a barrier. It was a doorway, a hungry mouth. Her elbow vanished next. The cold was no longer pain, it was clarity. She saw the house as it was, not decaying, but preserved. The dust motes hung suspended, the clock on the mantel frozen at 3:07. Time here wasn't broken. It was folded. A crumpled photograph of all the women who had stood before this glass, their reflections layered like ice sheets. Her mother's face, pale as a winter moon. Irina's silhouette, dissolving into the frost. They are not trapped, she realized. They are the trap. The hammer slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor in slow motion. It didn't make a sound. Nothing did. The house had gone silent, the way only a tomb can be silent. She stopped fighting. Let the cold take her. Let the glass weave her into its lattice. Her shoulder vanished. The mirror's surface rippled, pulling her in like a tide. She saw herself from outside, her body dissolving into crystalline fragments, each shard reflecting a different moment. A child's hand reaching for her grandmother's, a mother turning away, a girl staring at her own reflection in a puddle. I am all of them, she thought. I am none. The last thing she felt was the hammer, lying abandoned on the floor. Its head, now coated in a thin film of frost, caught the last sliver of moonlight. A perfect, frozen circle. She didn't scream. She didn't plead. She became the question. The cold wasn't a sensation anymore. It was a language. Katya felt it in the marrow of her dissolving bones, the way frost etches patterns into glass. The mirror's surface, once a barrier, now breathed like a lung, inhaling her. Her fingers, already translucent, pressed against the silvered void. No scream, only the quiet of ice, forming over her own reflection. She had believed truth would save her, the brittle logic of a child. If I know the wound, I can stitch it closed. But the mirror showed no wounds, only a mosaic of fractured faces. Irina's eyes, her mother's lips, the hollow smile of the girl who'd vanished 20 years ago. All her ancestors, all their grief, folded into her like origami. The glass didn't lie. It remembered. Her knee touched the mirror's plane, not a surface, but a threshold. The room behind her, the peeling damask, the moth-eaten velvet, the scent of damp wool and decay, blurred into a watercolor. The last thing she saw was her own hand, now a lattice of blue-tinged veins, vanishing into the glass. Not me anymore, she thought. The fear was gone. Only the weight of surrender, as light as a snowflake. Then, laughter. Not hers, a sound like shattering chandeliers. The mirror's surface rippled, and there it was, a face where hers had been. Young, unfamiliar, yet eerily right, as if it had always been waiting. The lips parted. Now it's you. The voice echoed inside her skull, though her mouth no longer existed to form words. Dr. Sokolov stood frozen in the threshold of the western wing, his breath fogging the air. He'd come too late. Or perhaps he'd never been meant to come at all. The mirror gleamed, flawless, as if no one had ever shattered it. In its depths, a woman's face smiled back at him, unblinking, serene. Not Katya. Never Katya. He reached out. The glass was warm. Outside, the wind carried the sound of cracking ice. The house exhaled. Somewhere deep in its bones, a new reflection settled, perfectly symmetrical. The cycle didn't need a beginning. It only needed continuation. The last thought in Katya's dissolving mind, who will I haunt? Then, nothing. Just the cold. Just the mirror. Just the face that wasn't hers, smiling in the blue light.